It's James Murray. We're in the NetNewsLedger studio. I'm here with Chief Isadore Day. Welcome back.
Hi, James.
We've been talking a lot lately. A couple of weeks ago when you were here, you were in Lac Seul First Nation.
That's right.
and attending some meetings. And since then you've been in Sudbury as well with some meetings. And there seems to be a growing, call it a movement,
Yep.
to get working with various jurisdictions of government, starting with municipal governments and First Nations. What do our viewers need to know?
Well, part of the main role and mandate of the Ontario Regional Chief position, which I'm seeking to obtain responsibility for, is to be able to coordinate the issues. And as I move across the various communities throughout the Ontario region, I'm hearing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That the jurisdictional issues, the overlap, and the conflict between governments is where the problem exists.
Yep.
And what I'm finding is that there seems to be a growing interest among First Nations and municipalities to say, okay, let's start looking at these issues and let's start to find some of the solutions to the problems that we face together. And that's what I'm seeing right across the board.
In a lot of cases, in terms of the federal and the provincial government issues, they do a trickle-down effect that municipalities in many ways probably feel a little bit like First Nations have, where they're at the bottom of the pile for getting help and support and the needed resources. So starting to work together from there can build a really strong base.
Right. I think there's a couple things to be said here on that issue. First Nations, I must say, and I'll declare it right here for the listeners and the viewers, First Nations will never be municipalized. And the reason is because we have constitutionally protected rights. We have rights that exist outside of the Canadian legal framework that indicate we are nations, that we have sovereignty that we've never relinquished, we've never been conquered as a people, we've never experienced defeat in war, we were always allies. So that being said, we have a sovereignty and the First Nation jurisdiction where municipalities are under the rule of provincial
Yes.
legislation. And that being said, once we understand the treaty relationship and noting that First Nations entered into treaties with the Crown then has these state governments with levels of jurisdiction. Just knowing that and two governments working together under the same understanding and that starts to give us a little bit more room and flexibility to start to work together in a mutually understanding way.
So if the concept that we're all treaty people
Right.
comes into play, and you work towards an idea towards seeking solutions together, nation to nation,
Right.
we can get more done.
Absolutely, and I think that's really important. That's kind of a little bit of a complexity in the treaty relationship that I think all viewers, all Canadians and municipal governments and in the province of Ontario need to wrap their heads around is the fact that when we sat down on that treaty blanket, the settler society came with nothing. And our people had that sovereignty. We maintained that sovereignty when we left that treaty blanket. We all ended leaving that treaty blanket with treaty rights. However, the treaty rights define how settler governments would work with the First Peoples of this country. And ours was a situation of treaty rights plus, because our inherent rights that underlie and give evidence to our treaty making abilities still exists. And it's a bit of a complex framework, but I think that we're coming to bear towards the solutions and understanding the legal standing and the rights of First Nations is going to be important going forward.
It seems to be increasingly important on issues with mineral rights and with water and so many issues now that are coming forward. So it's going to be, perhaps as Robert Kennedy often said back in the 1960s, we will live in interesting times.
Right. Absolutely, James. And I think this really does give a little bit of light and enthusiasm to the working relationships that First Nations are going to establish with municipalities. Because if you have a First Nation who has this level of legitimacy and authority, that's a darn good partner to have at the table. And I think many municipalities are realizing now that if you work with a First Nation, once you establish an understanding and an acceptance of the rights and authority that First Nations have, then going to the table will give you access to other levels of government where a municipality really just can't skip over and give direction or scrutinize the federal government on an EA process where a First Nation has the right and responsibility to continually be at that table with other levels of government. So I think the legal legitimacy and the legal standing that First Nations have is going to be a real plus when local governments start working together.
Now, how does that tie over to the provincial government and First Nations? Because it's underneath the federal government jurisdictionally, but when it comes to a lot of forestry and mining and resources and a lot of the issues, the province is kind of in charge of those.
The province has assumed jurisdiction and authority, and that all started in the British North American Act and the division of powers. But now we have a long list of cases that have went through different levels and layers of the judiciary, and the Supreme Court of Canada says it time and time again, First Nations have the right to self-determination. But there's a thing that we call infringement, and the Crown can infringe upon First Nation, Aboriginal and treaty rights for safety, conservation, and often does the First Nation have capacity? Well, that's beginning to change now. First Nations are now quite endowed with education and capacity, expertise, and we have young lawyers, we have experts, policy people that are able to address and reconcile the issue of infringement, and now we're ready to sit at the table and hammer these complex issues of jurisdiction out and really create our place at a table where we should have been all along.
So it's going to be change coming.
Yeah, and with respect to the municipalities and First Nations, I have spent time with a couple ministers, Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Municipal Affairs and Housing, and have been speaking with various chiefs around the province, and we're coming forward with a process that's going to be compelling enough. It's certainly compelling to the ministers that I've spoken to, and I've got some letters that are going to be issued in the next couple of days that are going to lay out a proposed plan. And come June 17th in the AOCC at the Chiefs of Ontario, we're going to have something tangible for the chiefs to work with, and I think that they're going to support it because it really is examining a much solid footing forward in terms of our rights and authority and working with local governments to help get that done.
I think often, as we've been talking, it's almost like going to school and learning and then sharing with our readers and our viewers what some of what might be history, but it's actually living history. And I appreciate you coming in and helping with that, because it's an important way for Ontario and for Canada to move forward.
Well, I have to give credit where credit's due. I think it's good interviewing, good journalism, but even more so, it's the chiefs and it's the citizens in the community that are essentially just giving me the information, and my job, and even in this campaign, is to put that out there. And I just am fortunate enough to have NetNewsLedger to be able to get that out on the airwaves, and I certainly appreciate the work that you're doing as well, James.
Make which?
Yep.
We'll be talking again, I'm sure.
Right, thank you.
I'm James in the NetNewsLedger studio with Chief Isadore Day.